How we remember. In this section, we're going to have a look at the process of remembering or recalling information. Both long-term recall, but we'll also start off thinking about short-term or working memory. And that's the type of memory where we have to direct conscious effort to recalling that information. So I might say to you, remember the number 843, or that is option D. And for those their information then you need to keep in sort of conscious attention on 843 option D. And the interesting thing about short-term memory is that if your attention gets directed elsewhere, so somebody interrupts you or you go and do something else, it's quite likely the things that you've been holding in your short-term memory, they're going to disappear. They typically are not retained unless conscious effort is directed towards them. And that's important. It's really important for how we design our applications. And there's a number of sort of takeaways on this particular screen here. The first one is that we really shouldn't require the user to hold things in the short-term memory unless it's strictly necessary. There's no other way around it. If we can represent information to the user, if we can remember it inside the program and then populate it on the next screen, we should do that. We should not really be asking the user to hold things in his or her short-term memory unless it's strictly necessary that they do this. And where it is necessary, we want to make sure then that in those cases we focus on that task. We get that task done that relies upon short-term memory. Because short-term memory is so sensitive to having attention being disruptive and changed elsewhere, we want to focus, get the task done so the user is unlikely then to forget what they've been working upon. And another aspect to this here is that stress. If you're under stress, and that may be, it could be a sort of a short-term one based on the application you're using. It could be something more general. But stress actually impairs our ability to remember information inside our short-term memory. And if we have a particular stressful element inside our application, the user's doing something that could be risky, something they could be worried about, something that could have significant impact. Let's say in terms of something to do with if it's a bank account, if they're transferring money. We want to make sure then in those cases we absolutely do not rely upon the user recalling things in their short-term memory, because that's much more risky. Our working memory as well, it's actually quite limited. It's very far from perfect, and crudely, and you can see this on the graph here, the number of items that we remember going from 1 across to 6. The more information we try to hold in short-term memory, the worse our recall is, and is actually quite a small number. First of all, good rule of thumb, don't require more than 4 items to be held in short-term memory, 4 being the maximum, and the best number being 0 or 1 if you have to do it, or 2, definitely no more than 4. And even at 4, it's still, you probably will have a number of cases where information will be lost. Now, we rely upon a whole set of aids in terms of lists and notes and other things really to get around our limitations of short-term memory, but absolutely it is quite a limited capacity that we have, and because of that our software should really be designed to support that limited capacity. If we then move on to looking or thinking a little bit more about maybe slightly longer term memory, so it's things we're not sort of consciously focusing on recall, but it's information we do have there. Now, recognition is easier than recall. So if I show you something and you then need to recognize, is this the right information or is this the thing you're looking for? That requires a bit of cognitive effort, but there's actually quite little cognitive effort compared to the case where I give you no cues and you have to go through your own memory and to recall the image, the figures unaided. So wherever possible, we should be providing contextual information, showing values, showing other things that will help the user if they need to recall something. If we do that, it makes it easier than if we provide no cues and we just rely on the user having to drudge it out of his or her own sort of long-term memory. There's some aspects then about recall as well, that if we're thinking about concrete items, So cat and tree are the two examples we've listed here. We can remember those concrete items much more easily because they're kind of visualizable than we can for abstract words, so freedom and justice. So concrete items, we'll recall those much more easily than we will abstract. And likewise, in terms of visual items as well, things that we can see in our mind's eye, we can recall or remember those more easily than things that we can't see or recall in our mind's eye. So use concrete terms, use icons wherever possible, and that will then aid the process of recognition, of recall of information. Key takeaway in this then is that memory, it does require a lot of mental effort. The fundamental thing underpins all of our design is making software as easy as possible for the user to use. That's not only from the purpose of improving the user experience, but it's also from a safety point of view as well. We don't want mistakes to be made, and high cognitive load can be one of the reasons why mistakes is made. So memory can be quite limited in terms of things like short-term memory, so we want to avoid it, or if we have to do it, make sure we're focused on it. For long-term recall, we want to use aids in terms of reminders and icons and other things that help the user recall that information. And if we do that, it'll just make it that bit easier for the user to be able to remember and use our applications. So the video after this, we're going to go on to thinking a little bit about how we think.